Have you ever met someone who changed everything? Not by saving you, but by needing to be saved. This is the story of a man who had nothing left to believe in, a daughter who kept him grounded, and a stranger who fell from the sky, bringing with her the weight of a broken past, and a second chance no one saw coming. In a quiet town forgotten by time, a storm was coming. Not just in the sky, but in their hearts, and when the wreckage settled, nothing would be the same again. Lucas Hale woke before the sun did. He always did, not because he liked mornings, but because silence was easier to manage than sleep. The cabin creaked with the weight of another winter, its bones dry and stubborn like his own. He moved through the kitchen with the quiet precision of someone who had memorized every loose tile, every drawer that stuck halfway. He poured black coffee into a mug that said, "World's okayest dad," a joke from Ruby, though she had no idea how accurate it felt some days. Outside, the sky was a dull grey, the kind of sky that didn't bother to pretend. The forecast had warned of a storm, but up here in Glenwell, forecasts were more like polite suggestions. Lucas pulled on his coat and opened the back door. The cold greeted him like an old argument. He stood there for a moment, sipping the bitter warmth, scanning the edge of the forest where pine trees swayed like they were holding secrets. This was home. Not by choice, but by retreat. After the accident, he left Denver. He left everything. Sold the house, quit the job at the aircraft design firm, packed whatever didn't break his heart to touch, and came here, to Glenwell. A town so small, even its map listing felt like an afterthought. But it had air that didn't smell like concrete, and space that didn't press in on him. That was enough. A sound inside broke the silence. Light footsteps, then the soft hum of a child making up her own song. Ruby. She was the only reason Lucas still marked time. She padded into the kitchen in mismatched pajamas, her hair a cloud of wild curls. She rubbed her eyes with the back of one hand and mumbled, "You made the coffee too early again." Lucas smiled, an involuntary twitch more than an expression. "You always say that," he said. Ruby climbed onto a stool, dragging a box of crayons with her. "Because it's always true." She spread out sheets of paper, already halfway into her next invention. Today it was a foldable airplane that could survive a lightning strike. She had theories. She always had theories. Lucas leaned against the counter, watching her with something like peace, or at least the closest thing he'd felt to it in years. There were moments, brief and sharp, when he could almost forget the noise, the phone call, the twisted metal, the impossibility of explaining to a 6-year-old why Mom wasn't ever coming back. Ruby never asked much after that. She just started building things, planes out of cardboard, wings out of hope. Had a control tower that she said could reach the sky if she kept stacking it high enough. Lucas had helped her, piece by piece, because helping her build made him feel like he was still capable of something that didn't end in failure. He didn't. Pray, not anymore. But sometimes, watching Ruby work, he wondered if the universe was giving him one last assignment. Don't mess this one up. And for now, that was enough. The first snowflake hit the window like a whisper. Then another. Then 1,000 more. By noon, Glenwell was vanishing under a curtain of white. The trees blurred into soft outlines. The mountain peaks disappeared behind the storm. It was the kind of snow that didn't just fall. It settled in, like it meant to stay. Lucas checked the generator, checked the propane, checked the flashlight drawer, then checked it again. Not because he needed to, but because old habits die hard and some fears never do. Inside, the fire crackled low in the stone hearth. Ruby sat cross-legged on the rug, her hands smudged with graphite and glue, her tongue pressed between her teeth in deep concentration. She was reinforcing the wings on her latest model. Lucas glanced out the window, then back to her. "You might want to add snow tires to that one." Ruby didn't look up. "Funny." The wind howled louder, rattling the window panes. Ruby finally paused, staring out at the shifting blur beyond the glass. "Do planes fly in weather like this?" she asked, voice quiet. Lucas looked at her for a beat too long. She wasn't just curious. There was something in her tone, something older than 8 years, something aching. He set his coffee down. "Not smart ones," he said. Storms like this, best place to be is home. Ruby nodded slowly, then picked up her model again, but didn't continue working. Lucas crossed the room and sat beside her. "You okay, kiddo?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "I had a dream last night that a plane crashed behind our house, but when we got there was no one inside. Just a music box still playing." Lucas swallowed. "That's oddly specific." Ruby looked up at him. Her hazel eyes were serious. It felt real. He hesitated. He didn't believe in signs. But grief has a way of making everything feel like an omen. "It was just a dream," he said gently. Ruby turned the model over in her hands. "Sometimes dreams are warnings." Lucas didn't respond. Outside, the wind rose, pulling snow sideways like it had somewhere to be. And for a moment, just a breath, Lucas felt it too, like the air had shifted. Like something was coming, not from the sky, but toward them. The power went out at 9:47 p.m. It was quiet at first, just a flicker. Then the hum of the refrigerator stopped, and the house seemed to exhale all at once. Ruby gasped from her blanket, fought near the fireplace, flashlight already in hand like it was part of her emergency drill. Lucas grabbed the backup lantern and flicked it on. A soft amber glow filled the room, dancing across the wood-paneled walls. "It's okay," he said, calm. "Just the storm flexing." Ruby crawled out of her fort, pulling her stuffed bear under one arm. "Do you think it's mad?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The storm. You said once that nature doesn't care what we want. Maybe this one's mad about something." Lucas smiled faintly. "Kids say strange things. Stranger still, sometimes they're right." He moved to the back door, lantern in hand, opened it slowly. The cold punched him square in the chest. Snow whipped sideways in the wind, the kind that stings your face and finds its way into your bones. Then it happened. A sound, distant, low, unnatural, not thunder, not wind, something mechanical. A rising whine, then a sudden thud, then fire. A pulse of orange light bloomed in the far distance beyond the tree line. Faint, but unmistakable. Lucas's gut clenched. Every part of him wanted to pretend he didn't hear it, that it was a transformer blowing, a tree falling, but he knew better. He turned to Ruby, kneeling. "Stay inside. Lock the door behind me. Dad, I'll be right back." Before she could argue, he pulled on his heavy coat, grabbed the high-beam flashlight from the hallway and stepped into the storm. Each step was a fight. Snow piled halfway up his shins. The wind screamed like it wanted to erase him from the world. But still he moved, past the fence, through the dead brush, across the field, toward the faint flicker in the dark. After 10 brutal minutes he saw it, a small aircraft. Private, high-end. The tail had dug a trench in the frozen ground, the wing snapped clean off and smoking. The front cabin was crumpled, glass spiderwebbed. Lucas slowed, shining the beam carefully across the wreckage. "Hello? Anyone inside?" No answer. Then a creak. The cabin door jolted slightly. He ran forward, climbing the crushed steps, pushing. The hatch open. Inside, the smell hit him first. Fuel, metal, and blood. A woman was slumped across the controls, motionless. Blood from her temple mixed with melted snow on her flight suit. Lucas leaned in, checked her pulse. Faint, but there. He didn't ask questions. He just moved. He wrapped her arms around his shoulders, lifted her as gently as he could, and carried her into the night. Her breath was shallow, her body far too cold. She stirred as they reached the edge of the field, eyes fluttering open, just enough to whisper. "Where am I?" Lucas didn't slow. "You're safe, I've got you." She passed out again. Back at the house, Ruby had opened the door and stood wrapped in a quilt. Her eyes widened as she saw the bleeding woman in her father's arms. "Is she an angel?" she asked, quiet. Lucas looked down at the stranger. Her face was pale, bruised, human. "No," he said, "but she fell from the sky just the same." The stranger woke to the sound of crackling wood and the smell of something warm and clean. Blankets, pine, maybe cinnamon. Her eyelids fought to lift, heavy from swelling and sleep. Her head pulsed with a dull, rhythmic ache, and her mouth was dry like she'd swallowed dust. She moved slightly and winced. Every muscle screamed, but she was alive. That surprised her. A voice came gently from across the room. "You're awake," she blinked. A man sat nearby in a worn armchair, mid-40s, weathered but not unkind. His hands were clasped loosely like he'd been waiting a while. "Where?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Where am I?" He stood, approached slowly, like one might approach a wounded animal. "You crashed. About a quarter-mile from here. You're in my house. Town's called Glenwell." She nodded slightly. The name meant nothing. "You've been unconscious for almost a full day," he added. "You've got a concussion, maybe cracked ribs. I did what I could." She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her side. She gasped, curling slightly. "Easy," he said, gently placing a hand near her shoulder but not touching her. "You're safe, just rest." She looked around. Small living room, stone fireplace, handmade furniture. A child's drawings pinned to a corkboard. Warm. Too warm for someone who didn't expect to survive the night. "I need my bag," she rasped. He stepped aside, reached behind the chair, and placed a torn leather satchel on her lap. Her fingers closed around it like it was an anchor. He didn't ask what was inside. "I'm Lucas," he said after a pause. "And you?" The woman looked at him, measured him, then said, "Nina." He waited, but no last name followed. She added, quickly, "Just flying through, got caught in weather I should have known better than to challenge." "Private plane?" he asked. She nodded. Lucas didn't press. But something about the way she said it, tight, rehearsed, didn't sit right. He knew the tone, he'd used it himself. "Ruby found your boots," he said, pointing to a pair near the door. "She thought maybe you were a pilot from a cartoon, Wings of Fire or something." "She?" Nina asked. "My daughter, 8 years old, smarter than me, sleeps like a rock. You'll meet her." Nina settled back into the pillow, eyes drifting, toward the fire. "Why did you bring me back?" she asked, more to herself than to him. Lucas didn't answer right away. He poured a cup of water, handed it to her carefully. "Because you were breathing," he said. "Didn't seem right to leave you behind." Nina stared at the glass in her hand, then at the flames. She didn't cry. She didn't thank him. But her fingers clutched the satchel tighter, and Lucas, for reasons he couldn't yet name, felt the first flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. A question. Who are you really? The next morning, the storm had calmed, but the world outside remained buried in white. The windows framed a frozen silence, and the trees stood still like they were waiting for something. Inside, the fire was still alive, and so was Nina. She sat upright now, a blanket around her shoulders, her face pale but alert. Her eyes scanned, the room like a pilot scanning the horizon, quiet, calculating, preparing for turbulence. Ruby appeared at the edge of the hallway, barefoot, hugging her stuffed bear to her chest. Her curls were a wild halo, and she blinked sleepily at the sight of the woman on their couch. "You're awake," she said simply. Nina turned, surprised. "I am." "You look like someone who fell out of the sky," Ruby added, stepping closer. Lucas, standing in the kitchen, half choked on his coffee. Nina let out a soft laugh, more air than sound. "Feels that way." Ruby sat cross-legged on the floor, watching her like a scientist observing a rare animal. There was no fear in her face, only curiosity. "What's your name?" "Nina." Ruby nodded as if filing it away. "I'm Ruby, I make things. Want to see?" Without waiting, Ruby ran to a small shelf, returned with something cradled in both hands. A paper airplane, but not a simple one. It had folded wings, a nose reinforced with tape, and marker scribbles that looked like technical sketches. "I call it Model 5. It's supposed to be stormproof." Nina took it slowly, like it might fall apart in her hands. "Did you make this?" Ruby nodded. "I make one every time I miss my mom. This one's for her birthday. I thought maybe... She could see it if I threw it high enough." Nina blinked. Her fingers trembled slightly on the paper. The room suddenly felt too warm. Lucas noticed but said nothing. Ruby continued, oblivious. "You can have it. You need it more than me, I think." Nina looked at her. Really looked. 8. Years old, honest, unfiltered, offering her something she didn't understand, but clearly meant everything. She opened her mouth to say thank you, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she placed the model gently beside her on the couch and said, "It's beautiful." Ruby smiled, proud. "Wanna help me build another?" "One?" Nina hesitated, then nodded. Lucas watched from the kitchen. He didn't interrupt, didn't explain. But when Nina leaned over and asked Ruby what kind of wings would hold in lightning, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition. Pain. And something that looked a little like regret. Lucas wasn't the kind of man who jumped to conclusions, but he noticed things, small things. The way Nina reached for tools without asking where they were, the way she corrected Ruby's wing structure not by guessing but by instinct, like someone who had done it 1,000 times before. That afternoon, while Ruby napped under a pile of blankets and paper scraps, Lucas stood in the doorway to the workshop. Nina was inside, organizing a scattered bin of screws and wires. Not idly, systematically. She paused when she saw him. "Hope you don't mind, this drawer was chaos." Lucas shrugged. "It's always chaos. I just know where the chaos lives." Nina gave a faint smile, then returned to sorting. Phillips. From flathead. Copper from steel. Left to right, precise. He stepped inside. "You know your way around tools." She didn't look up. "I fix things." "Planes?" he asked casually. She hesitated. "Sometimes." Lucas leaned against the workbench. "You mentioned you were just flying through. What kind of work do you do exactly?" She set down a wrench. "Freelance. Aviation consultant mostly. Some private flight gigs." "Out of where?" "Different places." "Don't stay in one spot long." Her answers came smooth, but just a little too smooth, like rehearsed lines from a story she'd told too many times. Lucas nodded slowly. Let silence stretch. Then, "That design Ruby showed you, Model 5? You changed the nose angle by 5 degrees. Mm-hmm. Why?" She looked up now. "Because her wings were set too narrow. If the nose stayed sharp, the lift would stall in crosswind. She'd never get it off the ground." Lucas held her gaze. "That's not something most casual flyers would catch." Nina didn't blink. "You said she was building it for her mum. I didn't want it to crash." There it was, the shift in tone, from calm to careful. Lucas didn't push further. He just nodded and walked back toward the doorway. As he left, Nina called out softly, "Thanks for letting me stay." He paused, one hand on the frame. "I didn't do it to be polite." Then he left the room. Back in the kitchen, he poured himself another cup of coffee, bitter, strong. He stared out at the snow-covered trees, steam rising from the mug like smoke from a downed engine. Nina Quinn. She said she was a freelancer. A.E. Passing pilot. But Lucas knew machines, and he knew people, and something about her didn't fly right. The snow had stopped by morning, but Glenwell remained wrapped in white. The roads were slush and ice, power lines sagged under the weight of frost, and the sky hung low like it hadn't finished grieving yet. Lucas made a supply run anyway. Ruby needed milk. Nina had barely touched the soup the night before. And Lucas, he needed space to think. The local general store was a converted barn at the edge of town. 2 aisles, 1 clerk, and a coffee pot that hadn't been cleaned since the Bush administration. Inside, the radio played faintly, some country ballad that rhymed heart with start. Lucas nodded at the owner, Dale, then grabbed what he needed. At the register, he waited as Dale searched for a pen. To kill time, Lucas glanced at the stack of old newspapers on the counter. Leftovers from bigger towns that Glenwell received a week late, if at all. One headline caught his eye. North Axis CEO disappears amid ongoing investigation. Lucas froze. The photo beneath the headline was black and white, grainy. But even blurred, the woman's face was unmistakable. High cheekbones, sharp eyes, that scar near her right brow, half hidden beneath wind-tossed hair. He picked up the paper. The date was nearly 6 weeks old. Catherine Wells, the article read, 43, aerospace engineer turned executive, missing after refusing, to testify about an engine failure that led to the crash of Flight 207, killing 37 people. Last seen boarding a private aircraft from an airstrip outside Seattle. Lucas read the paragraph twice. Then a third time. It wasn't just that the woman in the photo looked like Nina, it was that everything about the story aligned. The way she moved, the way she spoke around the truth, her grip on that leather satchel like it held something heavier than just clothes. Lucas folded the paper carefully, paid for the groceries, and left without a word. Back at the cabin, the fire was low, and Ruby was in the loft, humming to herself. Nina was in the kitchen, warming tea. She smiled when she saw him. He didn't smile back. He placed the milk in the fridge, then the rest of the supplies. Finally, he slid the folded newspaper onto the counter, face up. Nina saw it. Her body went still. The color drained from her cheeks. But she didn't flinch. Lucas didn't speak. He just watched her read the headline, watched her stare at her own face in print. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, Nina reached for the paper with both hands. Carefully, almost reverently, she looked up, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't have anything rehearsed to say. Lucas didn't ask right away. He just stood there, arms crossed, the folded newspaper between them like a loaded weapon. No one wanted to fire first. Nina placed the article down, aligning the edges with the grain of the wooden counter, as if neatness could soften what it revealed. "So," Lucas said at last, his voice low but steady, "is that your name?" She hesitated, just long enough to matter, then nodded. "Yes, Catherine Wells." "Yes," she said again, quieter. Lucas leaned back slightly, his jaw tight. "You lied." "I didn't tell you the truth," she corrected, like that made a difference. "There's a difference." "No," he said, "there isn't." The fire popped in the hearth behind them. Wind scraped along the roof, but the silence between them was louder. Nina didn't defend herself. She didn't reach for excuses. Instead, she walked to the couch and sat down slowly, like her body had finally caught up with the weight she'd been carrying. Lucas stayed standing. "You're wanted by federal authorities," he said. "You were supposed to testify about an engine failure that killed 36 people. Then you vanished." "I didn't vanish," she said. "I walked away." "Same thing." Nina looked up. Her eyes were clear, but exhausted. "You think I ran to avoid punishment," she said. "But I ran because I couldn't breathe, because every news outlet turned me into a villain, and because maybe they were right." Lucas stared at her. Nina continued, quieter now. "That engine model, I signed off on it. I pushed it into production. It was over budget, but I told myself we could solve the issues later. Just meet the deadline, get it approved. I knew the risks and I gambled with other people's lives." A long silence passed. Lucas looked away. He'd seen failure before, his own mostly. But this was different. This was someone saying out loud what most people spent lifetimes denying. Nina exhaled. It didn't crash right away. The first few flights were fine, and then Flight 207 dropped from the sky like it never belonged there. She stared at the floor. "I went to the memorial. No one recognized me. Or maybe they did and just didn't say anything. I stood in the back and listened to a woman talk about her husband, how he always brought a cookie home for their daughter after work. One cookie every time, and now there'd be no more cookies, just silence." Lucas rubbed a hand over his face. He didn't know what to say. Nina looked up again. "I didn't run from the law, Lucas. I ran from the guilt, and from the noise, and because I didn't think I deserved to keep living the way I had." "Then why come here?" he asked. "Why fly at night? Why crash?" Her voice cracked for the first time. "Because I wasn't flying toward anything. I was flying away." Lucas sat down across from her, the firelight drawing long shadows across the floor. "You could have died out there. I thought I might," she said. He stared at her for a long moment, not angry, just tired. Finally, he asked, "Is anything about you real?" Nina held his gaze. "This," she said. "This house, Ruby, you letting me in. That's the first real thing I've had in years." Lucas didn't respond, but something in him shifted. just slightly, because sometimes the most dangerous kind of liar is the one who finally tells the truth. Ruby hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She was on her way down the stairs, barefoot and quiet, her favorite blanket trailing behind her like a cape. She'd woken up thirsty, or maybe just curious. The light from the fireplace had still been flickering, and she wanted to see if the grown-ups were still talking. She stopped halfway when she heard her name, not shouted, just spoken, softly, carefully, like it might break if said too loud. Ruby leaned against the wall, heart thudding in her small chest. She listened. She didn't understand every word, but she understood enough. Flight 207, dead people, a crash, her model airplane, Nina not being Nina. Her real name, Catherine. A mistake, a big one, the kind that changes everything. Downstairs, voices fell into silence again, thick, uncomfortable. Ruby stepped back slowly, careful not to creak the stairs. She didn't cry, not right away. She just turned and walked back to her room. Inside, the paper models she'd made with Nina sat on her desk, lined up in a perfect row. She stared at them for a long time, then picked up Model 5. It was the one she'd given to Nina the day after the storm, the one she built with hope and a folded message in the wing that read, "Fly high, but come back." She pulled it apart, without thinking. A single tear rolled down her cheek, landing silently on the paper. Ruby climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. She didn't understand all of it, but she knew what it felt like when someone left. And this time it hurt worse than before, because she'd let Nina in. The morning light crept in, slow, grey and cold. It painted soft lines across the wooden floor, catching dust in the air like floating ash. The storm had passed, but the stillness it left behind felt heavier than snow. Nina was already dressed, jeans, boots, coat zipped halfway. No makeup, no bags, just the worn satchel over her shoulder, the one she hadn't let go of since the crash. She moved through the cabin with practiced quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from knowing exactly which floorboards creak, which doors sigh when opened. Lucas was still asleep in the armchair, his head tilted back, arms crossed. The fire had burned low, casting shadows up the stone chimney. She looked at him for a long time, not to memorize him. She already had. She turned toward the kitchen table, where Ruby's paper model still sat, now slightly bent from use and play. Nina reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in tissue, Model 6. She had made it the night before in the loft while everyone slept. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. The wings were layered with care, the center folded. Sharp, precise. She laid it gently on the table next to a folded note, no envelope. Just a line written in her steady engineer's handwriting. "Don't stop building, don't stop forgiving. Some wings are meant to return." She stepped back, then turned, eyes flicking once more around the room, the smell of burnt wood, the hum of a space heater, the faint sound of Ruby's breathing upstairs. She didn't cry, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't afford to. Not now. At the door, she paused. Her hand rested on the knob. And for the first time in years, Nina Quinn, Catherine, Wells felt something pull at her, a thread, thin, invisible, tied not to guilt, but to a little girl's voice, a man's silence. A home she hadn't earned, but had somehow been given, if only for a few days. Still, she opened the door and stepped into the morning frost. The motel was the kind that never asked questions. Off the highway, 2 hours west of Glenwell, vinyl, curtains, dim lamplight. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it just isolates. Nina sat on the edge of the bed, fingers curled around a photograph. The edges were soft. The colors faded, but the image remained clear. A younger woman, herself, just barely out of college. Hair tied back, eyes wide and unsure. In her arms, a baby girl wrapped in hospital linen, asleep against her chest. No name written on the back. No date. Just a crease where she'd folded it once too many times. She remembered everything about that day. The nurse who handed her the child with gentle detachment. The social worker standing nearby, clipboard in hand. The clock on the wall, that ticked too loud, the weight in her arms that felt both foreign and familiar. They told her she didn't have to decide right away, but Nina had already made her choice. She'd written it into her scholarship application, into her calendar, into the contracts she would sign within weeks of graduation. She had mapped her future in precise aerodynamic lines, and nowhere in that design was a baby. She had held her daughter for 17 minutes, then signed the release papers with hands that didn't shake until afterward. Now, years later, the photo felt heavier than her satchel. She whispered to the empty room, "I don't even know what your name is." It came out like a confession, but no one was listening. She leaned back on the thin mattress, holding the picture above her face. The girl's face in the photo, barely formed, eyes closed, mouth parted in sleep, was frozen in a moment that had continued without her. Did she grow up wondering? Did someone else teach her to read, to ride a bike, to trust? Would she hate the woman who gave her away? Or worse, not think of her at all? Nina turned the photo over. Blank. For years she'd told herself she made the right decision. That her daughter deserved stability, love, protection. All things Nina wasn't sure she could offer back then. But that logic felt paper-thin now, against the raw ache in her chest. Because for all her brilliance, for all the flight hours, boardrooms, and executive titles, Nina had no answer for the question that haunted her most. If her daughter stood in front of her now, would she recognize her? Night settled like dust, quiet and uninvited. The room was dark, save for the neon flicker from the motel sign outside. It pulsed weakly through the blinds, red, then dark, then red again. A broken heartbeat. Nina sat at the small desk by the window, her face half lit by the screen of an old lamp. Her satchel lay open beside her, papers spilling out in loose piles, documents, engineering notes, clippings of her own past. She didn't read them, she just stared through the window, into the nothingness beyond. She'd outrun headlines, hearings, even her own name. She'd crossed states, changed cities, traded Catherine Wells for Nina Quinn because it felt like someone lighter, someone who hadn't broken anything. But now in this quiet, stripped-down motel room, there was no one left to pretend to be. No more Ruby's laughter to mask the silence. No more Lucas to distract her with coffee and guarded kindness. Just her. And the question that had followed her longer than any reporter. If I strip away the lies, what's left of me? She took a slow breath, then picked up one of Ruby's paper models from her coat pocket, the one she couldn't bring herself to leave behind. Model 5. Slightly bent, but intact. She held it to the light. Read the small lines still faint on. The wing fly high but come back. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, from knowing. She'd never let herself come back to anything, until now. The storm had cleared, but the cabin still felt quiet, too quiet. Lucas moved through the house like a man trying not to admit someone was missing. He cooked, cleaned, repaired a leaky pipe in the bathroom that had waited months, but none of it filled the silence. Ruby said little. She still played with her models, still watched the snowfall, still laughed at her cartoons, but the spark had dimmed. One afternoon, while Lucas was chopping wood outside, Ruby sat alone at the kitchen table with a pencil and a blank page. She wrote slowly, carefully. She didn't tell her dad. She didn't tell herself exactly why, she just knew the words had to go somewhere. Dear Miss Nina, I don't know if that's your real name, but I'm going to use it anyway. Because it's the name you used when you were kind to me. I know. You left. I heard things I wasn't supposed to. Things about accidents, about lies, about running away, but I also remember other things, like how you fixed the wing on Model 5 without even asking, and how you didn't laugh when I said I thought my planes could fly to heaven, and how you looked at me like I wasn't just a kid, but someone worth listening to. Some people do bad things and stay bad, but I don't think you're one of those people. I think you're someone who did something wrong, and then forgot you're still allowed to be good. If you're reading this, it means I found a way to send it, probably through Mr. Dale at the store. He doesn't ask questions. Please don't feel like you have to come back, but if you want to, you can. We didn't throw away your cup, or your coat, or the plane you made. Love, Ruby P.S. I'm building Model 7. I saved the seat next to me. The letter was folded in half and placed inside a blank envelope. Ruby added one final touch, a drawing of a plane slightly crooked, with 3 stick figures in the cockpit, one big, one medium, and one small. She handed it to Dale the next morning with a dollar bill and a whispered request he didn't ask, just nodded. 2 days later, Nina sat on a park bench outside a library in a town whose name she couldn't remember. She was halfway through a cup of bad coffee when the motel clerk walked up to her with a puzzled look. "This came for you," he handed her the envelope. No return address, just her name, Miss Nina, in small, careful handwriting. She opened it, read it once, then again, and somewhere in the space between the first and second reading, something inside her broke, not like glass, but like a lock. She folded the letter gently, held it to her chest. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was falling. She felt like someone somewhere still believed she could land. It was late afternoon when the truck pulled up, old, dusty, familiar in a way that made Lucas pause mid-step on the porch. He narrowed his eyes against the sun. The driver's door opened. Nina stepped out, same coat, same boots, satchel slung over her shoulder, but something had changed. Her face was softer, like she'd dropped a weight or accepted that she couldn't carry it anymore. She looked up at him. Lucas didn't say anything, didn't move, just waited. Nina held his gaze as she walked up the steps. "I read the letter," she said. Lucas nodded. "Once. Figured you might. She didn't have to write it." "No," he said. "But she wanted to." Nina exhaled. Not a sigh, but something closer to surrender. "I didn't come back to hide," she added. "I know I still have to face things. I didn't want the last thing Ruby remembered about me to be silence." Lucas stepped aside, opened the door. "She's upstairs," he said. "Building something." Nina hesitated before stepping in. The cabin looked exactly the same. But it felt different, like it had waited. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Ruby stopped at the bottom, one hand on the banister, her eyes wide, the blanket she always dragged behind her trailing like a cape. She didn't say anything, just looked. Nina dropped to one knee. "I got your letter." Ruby stayed still. "I don't know if I deserve a second chance," Nina added. "But I'm here, if you still want me to be." There was a beat. Then Ruby walked over, holding something behind her. Back a new model airplane, Model 7, brighter colors. Sharper wings, a small paper pilot folded inside. She placed it in Nina's hands. "You missed lunch," Ruby said. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen. Nina blinked hard, then followed. Lucas stayed where he was, watching the space between them close. Not everything had to be forgiven in words. Some things could be built again, one wing at a time. The kitchen smelled like garlic and something warm. Lucas stirred the pot with quiet focus, occasionally glancing over his shoulder. Nina set the table, 3 plates, 3 cups, no questions. Ruby folded napkins into triangles and lined them up like runway lights. No one said much, but no one needed to. When they sat down, the chairs creaked in familiar ways. The cabin breathed with them. 3 sets of hands, 3 different histories, 1 table between them. Ruby was the first to speak. "Dad burns the rice if you don't watch him." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Hey," Nina smiled. "Noted." They ate slowly. Between bites, Nina noticed Ruby had tucked the folded Model 7 on a nearby windowsill, angled like it was ready to take off. Lucas passed her the bread without a word. She passed it back when he forgot the butter. Ruby chewed, with her feet swinging off the chair, occasionally glancing between them like a weather report. No one apologized, no one explained. But when Nina reached to refill Ruby's cup and Ruby didn't pull away, Lucas knew something had been repaired. Not all the way. Not yet, but enough for now. And maybe that was what healing looked like. Not dramatic, not perfect, just a meal shared in quiet, and the choice to stay seated. Every spring, Glenwell held a small town festival, not for tourists, there weren't any, but For themselves, homemade pies, wood-carved trophies, and in recent years, thanks to Ruby, a model aircraft showcase in the community center gym. Lucas wasn't one for crowds, but Ruby had begged him to sign up. Nina, too. So he did. With conditions, they'd go. But Nina would be in charge of the workshop table because you're the only one here who actually knows what she's doing. She didn't say yes at first, but she didn't say no. And by Saturday morning, Nina was seated behind a folding table covered in paper, tape, and makeshift wing struts. A small hand-lettered sign read, "Build and fly for all ages." The gym buzzed with noise, kids laughing, parents chatting, the occasional thud of a glider crashing into a wall. Ruby darted between tables like a professional event coordinator. Nina sat quietly, folding and demonstrating. Her hands worked on instinct. For years they had been instruments of precision and control. Today they were instruments of joy. A little boy with thick glasses asked her why planes had elevators if they didn't go up floors. She answered seriously. And older man with calloused hands asked if she used to work in aviation. She paused, then nodded once. "I did," he smiled. "You should teach." She laughed softly. "That's what I'm doing now, isn't it?" Later, as the room thinned and sunlight streamed through the windows, Ruby returned to Nina's table with a juice box and a clipboard. "You got 6 sign-ups," she said proudly. "For your next class." Nina blinked. "My next class?" Ruby shrugged. "People like learning from someone who doesn't make them feel stupid." Lucas approached from behind, coffee in hand. He nodded, toward the row of models now gliding through the air. "Looks like you made something take off," he said. Nina looked around. Dozens of little planes, wobbling, soaring, crashing, flying again. Not perfect, but airborne. She exhaled, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like an outsider trying to pass through. She felt useful, rooted, not flying away, but staying. The man arrived late in the day, slacks too crisp for Glenville, shoes with no mud on them, a jacket tailored just enough to say, "I don't live here." He stood near the edge of the community center gym, watching, not browsing, observing. Lucas saw him first. He was helping Ruby gather leftover paper scraps when the man approached, slow, polite, but with the confidence of someone used to being noticed. "Lucas Hale?" he asked. Lucas didn't answer right away. He studied the man's eyes. Steady, practiced. Depends who's asking. The man offered a card. Grant Keller. Independent investigative journalist. Lucas didn't take it. Keller glanced toward Nina, still kneeling with a small group of kids, showing them how to fold a complex wing shape. "I've been following a story," Keller said, keeping his voice low. "Or maybe chasing a ghost. Until last week, Catherine Wells was presumed dead. Then someone fitting her description showed up in a cabin in Colorado. Small town. No coverage, no arrest." Lucas said nothing. Keller continued calmly. "I'm not here to ruin lives. I'm here to finish a story the public was never allowed to hear." Lucas's voice was quiet, firm. "She's not your headline." Keller didn't flinch. "I think she wants to be. Not the scandal part, the truth part." Lucas turned his back and walked away. A moment later, Keller was standing across from Nina. She didn't look surprised. She looked resolved. "Mr. Keller," she said, standing up slowly. "I figured you'd find me eventually." He nodded. "I've been trying for 2 years." "I wasn't hiding," Nina said. "You changed your name." "I changed who?" "I was?" Keller's expression softened just slightly. "I don't care about page views," he said. "I care about closure. 37 families were told the truth was too complicated, too technical. You're the one person who can explain it, and you vanished." "I wasn't ready," Nina said. "And now?" She looked past him. For a second toward Ruby, who was laughing with a boy at the glider ramp, then back at Keller. "I'm not running anymore," she said. "But I'm not performing either." He handed her a folded envelope. "This isn't a threat, it's an invitation, public forum. You speak on record. Say what really happened, not through lawyers. In your words." Nina took the envelope. "Didn't open it. I'll think about it." Keller nodded once, then turned and walked out into the late afternoon light. Lucas stepped beside her as the door closed. "You okay?" She stared down at the envelope. Her hands didn't shake. I think I might be. Lucas didn't push further, because some confrontations don't leave bruises. They leave clarity. That night the cabin was still. Ruby was asleep, curled under her blanket, clutching a paper glider like it was a teddy bear. Downstairs, Nina stood, by the fireplace, envelope in hand. She hadn't opened it. She didn't need to. She already knew what it said. Lucas leaned against the kitchen counter, mug of coffee untouched in his hands. Neither spoke for a while. Then Nina broke the silence. "I'm not going to run." Lucas nodded slowly. "Didn't think you would." She turned to face him fully. "I don't want to make it about saving face or rewriting the past. I think people deserve the truth, even if it hurts." Lucas took a sip of coffee. It had gone cold, but he didn't seem to mind. "Then tell it," he said. "Not for them, not for me, for you." Nina looked back at the fire. Its light flickered across her face, catching something in her eyes that wasn't quite fear anymore, just clarity. "When I signed those approvals," she said quietly, "I believed I was helping push something forward. Faster, smarter, better. And when the engineers flagged a design flaw, I told them we'd fix it in production." That was the exact phrase, "we'll fix it later." Lucas didn't interrupt. Nina continued, "They never got the chance. Flight 207 went down before later could happen. And I thought, maybe disappearing would protect the company. Or maybe just let me disappear with the lie." Lucas set the mug down and stepped closer. "You know," he said, "there's a difference between repairing something and issuing a warning." Nina looked up. "What do you mean?" "You can't undo what happened," he said. "You can't fix it like a broken wing. But maybe you can stop someone else from doing what you did. Maybe that's your warning." She didn't respond right away. Then quietly, "That would mean stepping into all of it. Cameras, headlines, people asking things I don't want to answer." Lucas nodded. "Yeah, it will." A pause. Then, "I'll go with you, if you want." Her eyes softened. That same invisible thread still there, still holding. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm offering." Nina looked down at the envelope one last time, then set it on the mantel. "I'll say yes tomorrow." And this time she meant it. They called it Paper Skies. It wasn't a real school. Just a room above the library, a few folding tables, stacks of colored paper, scissors, and glue. But the flyer said, "Aviation for beginners," and the kids didn't care about credentials. They cared that someone listened when they asked why wings curved. They cared that someone didn't laugh when they asked if a plane could touch a cloud. Nina sat at the head of the room, guiding 10 small hands through the first folds of a glider. Her voice was calm, her movements exact. She spoke like someone who knew what it meant to fall, and what it meant to try flying anyway. Ruby sat at the corner table, her Model 8 halfway built. She was quieter today, not sad, not upset, just thoughtful. The kind of quiet that makes grown-ups nervous because it's harder to read than noise. After the class, while the others ran down the stairs with their paper planes flapping like hopeful birds, Ruby stayed behind. She waited until the room emptied, then walked over, holding her newest model. Nina smiled. "Let me guess, extra fins for stability?" Ruby nodded, then hesitated. Her voice was soft. "Too soft for someone usually so certain. Can I ask something?" Nina nodded. Ruby looked down at the plane, then up at her. "Are you my mom?" The question landed like silence does, sudden, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Nina blinked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She knelt, eye level with Ruby now. "No," she said gently. "I'm not." Ruby looked down. "Okay." Nina waited. Let the silence stretch, but not suffocate. Then, carefully, "Why did you think I might be?" Ruby's fingers fidgeted on the wing. "Because when you left it hurt the same way. And when you came back, I forgave you anyway. And that feels like something moms are supposed to be part of." Nina swallowed hard. She didn't correct her. She didn't explain adoption or biology or legal rights. She just placed a hand gently over Ruby's. "I'm not your mom," she said, "but I love you like someone who could have been." Ruby didn't say anything. She just leaned forward and hugged her. Not long, not tight, but real. And Nina held her like she'd never let her fall. The envelope came by mail, thicker than usual. Padded, from Seattle. Lucas almost didn't open it. He'd applied months ago, half out of habit, half from a restless night when the snow was falling too loud and the silence in the cabin felt like a trap. It was a senior mechanic position with a regional airline. Better pay, benefits, a structured schedule, and a chance to be back where people called you sir for knowing your way around an engine. He sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the offer. Signed letter, contract draft. A polite note. From the director of operations. Ruby was in the loft, stringing paper planes into a mobile. Nina was at the community center, prepping for her next class. Lucas read the offer twice. Then again. Then he folded it neatly and left it on the table. That night he stood outside on the porch, hands in his coat pockets, breath rising in clouds. The stars were clear, sharp against the cold. Nina joined him a few minutes later, too, mugs in hand. He took one without a word. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Got an offer." She raised an eyebrow. "Seattle. Airline job. It's a good one." Nina didn't speak for a beat. "And? I'm not taking it." Her gaze lingered, on him. "Why not?" Lucas looked out into the dark. His voice came quiet even. "Because for the first time in years I wake up and feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Not passing through, not waiting for something to change. Just here." She didn't answer. Just stood beside him, both hands wrapped around her mug. Lucas added, "I thought I was supposed to chase purpose. Turns out maybe purpose has been sitting at my kitchen table, building airplanes out of scrap paper." He half smiled, "and yelling at me when I burn the eggs." They stood in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't push you away, just lets you breathe. Finally, Nina said, "I'm glad you're staying." Lucas took a sip of the now lukewarm drink. "Yeah," he said, "me too." The table wasn't fancy, scratched wood, mismatched chairs, one leg propped up with a folded magazine from 3 winters ago, but the food was hot and the air was full of quiet laughter. Lucas had made chili again. He said it was because he liked it. Ruby said it was because it was the only thing he hadn't burned. Nina brought fresh bread from the bakery downtown. She didn't say it, but the way she sliced it, careful even, spoke of someone who had started finding comfort in routine. They didn't talk about the offer. They didn't talk about job titles or what-ifs or timelines. They just ate. Ruby spooned extra beans into her bowl, then wrinkled her nose. "Why are beans in everything grown-ups cook?" Lucas didn't miss a beat. "Because beans are cheap, nutritious, and keep kids humble." Ruby rolled her eyes. "That's what people say when they can't cook." Nina laughed into her glass. There were no big declarations, no "we're a family now" speeches, but there was the sound of dishes clinking, of chairs shifting, of feet brushing under the table. There was warmth. Lucas looked up at one point and saw it, Ruby humming softly, tapping her spoon on the rim of her bowl. Nina tearing bread and handing him the crust without asking. She'd noticed it was the part he liked, and him. Just sitting, not fixing, not worrying, present. He hadn't known what he'd wanted out of life for a long time, but maybe this was it. Not headlines. Not redemption. Just 3 people who'd found each other the hard way. And stayed. As the night wore on, the fire crackled low. Ruby yawned mid-sentence, her voice trailing off halfway through a story about a flying car made of noodles. Nina smiled, brushing hair from the girl's eyes. "Bedtime." "No," Ruby mumbled, already leaning against her side. Lucas stood, lifted her gently. Ruby didn't resist. She was out before he reached the stairs. Nina stayed behind, stacking plates. Lucas paused at the top of the stairs. "You know," he said, "this feels a lot like something we never planned." Nina glanced up, tired but content. "That's the best kind," he nodded, and in the glow of the firelight for once everything felt enough. It arrived on a Wednesday. The mail in Glenwell came slow, hand-sorted, paper envelopes. No tracking numbers, and usually just bills or small-town flyers. But this one was different. Nina found it tucked between a grocery ad and a reminder for Ruby's dental checkup. No return address, just her name on the front, Catherine Wells, in handwriting she didn't recognize. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in weeks, maybe months. Maybe longer if she was honest. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no decoration, no formal greeting, just words, simple, clean, and full of something she hadn't expected. I know who you are, and I think I'm ready if you are. She read the first line 3 times before her eyes could continue. I used to wonder what your voice sounded like. I used to imagine it was soft but sharp, like a song you don't hear much anymore. I didn't know how much of you was me, or how much of me was you, but lately I've been thinking, maybe I want to find out. I'm not writing to blame you. I'm not even writing to ask why. That part doesn't hurt like it used to. What I'm writing for is this. I think you tried your best, and I think I want to know you anyway. Maya. Her name was Maya. Nina stared at the signature as though seeing her own reflection for the first time. Small, slanted, familiar in ways she couldn't explain. She sat down slowly, the letter still in her hands. For so many years she had lived with the silence, the decision, the what-ifs, and now a voice, grown, curious, open, was calling back across the space between them. It wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding, but it was enough to shake something loose inside her. Lucas found her like that, sitting quietly at the table, a tear tracking down one cheek. He didn't ask, just sat down across from her, letting the quiet do what it needed to. After a long while, Nina spoke. She wrote to me. Lucas waited. My daughter. Her name is Maya. He nodded once. That's a good name. Nina smiled, a fragile thing. She wants to meet, maybe, if I'm ready. Lucas leaned back, exhaled. Are you? Nina looked out the window, where Ruby was in the yard trying to teach a paper plane to land on a tree branch. It crashed every time, and she just kept laughing. And trying again. I don't know, she whispered, but I think I want to be. The road was cracked. Weeds split through the asphalt, like time itself had tried to reclaim the place. The old airstrip sat on the outskirts of Glenwell, forgotten. By most, left behind by the rest. Rusted hangars, faded paint lines, wind sweeping through empty space. But today, 3 people stood at the center of it. Lucas leaned against the truck, arms crossed, watching the horizon like it still had something left to give. Nina stood beside him, her coat zipped up to her, chin one hand in her pocket, the other holding tightly to a small note. Ruby ran ahead, arms outstretched like wings. Was it really this big? She asked. Nina smiled softly. It used to feel bigger. Ruby stopped, turned around. Did you fly from here? Nina nodded. Once. Ruby pulled something from her backpack, a fresh paper glider, carefully folded, decorated in bright marker swirls. Model 9. Can I throw it? She asked. Nina hesitated, then said, Yeah, but give it a reason. Ruby blinked. A reason? Lucas chimed in. Every flight has a reason, even paper ones. Ruby thought for a second, then held the model close and whispered something. Nina couldn't hear. She walked to the edge of the cracked runway. The wind picked up, tugging at her scarf. Ruby took a breath, and threw. The plane caught the wind, rose, dipped, and rose again. It didn't go far, but for a second it looked like it might. Nina watched it with something quiet in her chest, something that might have been peace. Ruby turned. Did I do it right? You did it perfect, Nina said. She walked toward the girl and knelt beside her. What did you whisper to it? She asked. Ruby shrugged. That it was okay to go. That it didn't have to come back if it didn't want to. Nina blinked hard. Looked away. Lucas watched from a distance. He didn't interrupt, just stood with his hands in his pockets, letting the wind move around them. Nina stood and looked down the empty strip. This place saw my worst moment, she said quietly. Lucas stepped beside her. Not anymore. Ruby ran ahead again, chasing the next gust of wind, and behind her 2 adults stood still, side by side. Not running, not hiding. Just watching something small fly, because sometimes letting go was the only way to stay grounded. The workshop was quieter now, not empty, just full of focus. Full of the kind of quiet that comes from people building something side by side, not rushing it. Lucas stood at the far bench, sanding down a wood support beam. Ruby sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching with markers on the back of an old blueprint. Nina stood at the drafting table. A single sheet of paper lay open beneath her hands. Not a model, a design. Hand-drawn, detailed, scaled. She had titled it in pencil, Together, Model 10. It wasn't meant to fly far. Not fast, just stable, balanced. A glider that could carry two folded figures in tandem. She adjusted a curve on the wing, checked the ratio, then set the pencil down, finally satisfied. Ruby jumped up and came over, peeking over the table's edge. "Is that the new one?" Nina nodded. "It looks like a bird," Ruby said. "It kind of is," Nina replied. "A bird that never has to fly alone." Ruby smiled, then went back to coloring the tail section. Lucas joined them, wiping his hands on a rag. "She's been talking about painting it," he said. "Neon green," Nina laughed. "Let her. Every bird needs its own feathers." Lucas glanced at the blueprint. "You naming this one?" Nina looked at the title, then back at him. "I think the name's right where it belongs." A moment passed, then another. Outside the window, snow had started to fall again. Not a storm, just a soft drift, the kind that blankets the world without demanding anything from it. Lucas walked to the stove and poured 3 mugs of cocoa. He passed one to Nina without comment. She held it in both hands. Let the warmth settle in. A silence stretched comfortably between them. Then, almost like a thought spoken out loud, Nina said quietly, "I've already landed." Lucas looked at her. Not surprised, just understanding. She wasn't talking about a plane. Not really. Not anymore. Nina didn't need applause, or headlines, or absolution. She had this: a table, a girl, a man, a design no one else would build, but somehow always meant to exist, together.